Welcome to the integration session, where we explore the science, stories, and future of psychedelics. I'm Dr. Elena Koning, and today I'm thrilled to share with you my conversation with Dr. Bia Labate, a renowned anthropologist, activist, and executive director of the Chacruna Institute for Psychedelic Plant Medicines. This conversation was recorded in a live interview from the Queen's University Psychedelic Society Speaker Series, so a bit of a different format, but I'm excited to share it with you. So first, a little bit about our guests. So Dr. Bia Labate is an anthropologist, educator, author, speaker, and activist committed to the protection of sacred plants while amplifying the voices of marginalized communities in the psychedelic science field. As a queer Brazilian anthropologist based in San Francisco, she has been found profoundly influenced by her experiences with ayahuasca since 1996. Dr. Labate has a PhD in social anthropology from the University of Campinas in Brazil. Her work focuses on plant medicines, drug policy, shamanism, ritual religion, and social justice. She is the executive director of the Chacruna Institute for Psychedelic Plant Medicines and serves as a senior advisor for culture and strategy at the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. Additionally, she is a visiting scholar at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley and acts as an advisor for around 15 organizations, among them the Veteran Mental Health Leadership Coalition, Solterra Healing Center, Sacred Plant Alliance, and the Alaska Entheogenic Awareness Council. Dr. Labate is also a co-founder of the Interdisciplinary Group for Psychoactive Studies in Brazil and the editor of its site. She has authored, co-authored, and co-edited 28 books, 3 special edition journals, and numerous peer-reviewed and online publications. So thank you so much and welcome, Dr. Bia Labate. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Labate.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
So to start, I would love to get to know a bit more about your journey to this point. So you've obviously been a very prolific voice in the field, and like I said, you earned your PhD in anthropology and have over 30 years of firsthand experience participating in a variety of psychedelic ecosystems all over the world. So how did those firsthand experiences shape your research interests, if at all?
In one line, they really shaped it. My whole interest in this field is because I have tried sacred plants and have incredible experiences that really opened my mind and had a deep existential effect on me and helped me see the world in an entirely new manner, and also myself, and being alive here now today, being part of Earth, and really open my mind and change my views. And then, as a kind of natural continuation and curiosity, I started to read, I started to ask questions, I started to travel, I started to have more experiences, and it was something really organic that built from there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and did that come before your PhD studies, or was it sort of throughout or after?
No, that was much before. I was still doing my initial studies in social sciences. I had studied, beginning study anthropology, and I was backpacking in Mexico, visiting different indigenous communities as part of my initial years as an anthropologist, and doing some adventure backpacking as well, just traveling, and tried different things and started to be curious about it and connect to other people, read. For me, the pursuit of anthropology has always been a kind of attempt to understand different cultures, traditions, lands, people, and psychedelics got involved in this. And I started to read and get more interested, and just make new friendships, and travel later on to the Brazilian Amazon and did a lot of adventures, tried ayahuasca, started to talk to people, learned about the things that existed, read, write, organize conferences. It was something that started to get me involved and pull me in.
Mm-hmm.
Continues to do so.
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting that you have both those sort of like the traditional education of doing a PhD and also the more experiential experiences. Do you feel like there's a lot of like, do you think that's pretty crucial to where you are now in terms of your career?
Can you say again? Sorry, I got distracted.
No worries. I was just thinking about the different sort of contrast between traditional academia and doing a PhD and the more experiential learning, such as your experiences in Mexico. So, do you think that both of those are really important to where you are now in your career?
Yes, very well put. I think I've always had this intellectual interest for this, but I also had my personal spiritual self-knowledge, cultural interest on this. They are mixed, but they are kind of separate as well. And I don't know, the academic career, it is wonderful and it allows us to go really deep and study. I am a little bit nostalgic of my academic days. You guys are studying now, do your PhD. It's a beautiful phase of life that you can just go, on a Tuesday afternoon and spend a whole afternoon discussing a paper. It's
Hmm.
good to have that isolation, that kind of space to really just learn and research and talk to colleagues and do self-reflections. At the same time, academia doesn't really support a lot of our personal creative side, let's say. I've always felt kind of constrained, like you have to sort of keep this academic persona, you have to talk a lot to peers. I've always liked to do a lot of jokes. I like to be funny. I like to be on stage. I kind of always felt a little bit repressed, that I could have to act in a certain way because I am a doctor, because I'm a professor, because I have students, because I teach. And I had other sides that were more creative, more expansive, that I didn't feel have space in academia. And also, I just wanted to do activism and be like vocal and political and open and talk about my experiences. I mean, I don't really like to talk about my experiences too much, to be honest. I kind of keep them private,
Hmm.
but just feeling more space uh, to follow my heart. I felt that academia is not very conducive of that. And also there's all these pressures, of publication, of productivity, that leads to this kind of system that has its limitations as well, that a lot of people start to publish things that are not original and do bureaucratic, boring, uninteresting publications because they are sucked into that machine. And you
Hmm.
also get sucked into a lot of administrative tasks, a lot of kind of just day to day, academic bureaucracies and reports and a lot of pressure, not a lot of funding, a lot of competition. But I think the thing that I most miss is just having an impact on the world in a more direct manner. I do think that academia has impact on the world, and ideas, academics are breeding ideas that will be foundational to us on many levels. But with Chacruna, you can see that really like immediate, like you publish an article and next week you go to a party and you see two people discussing the topic of your article. It's very in your face. And, we just got kind of addicted to that. You create a cool title, a flashy, sexy opening image, like a nice illustration, maybe a short little video, something more multimedia, infographics, this kind of making academic knowledge more accessible with a clear impact on reality.
Hmm.
And, being able to answer in a very fast manner. Something happens, we can publish. We don't go through this whole peer review process, which not necessarily is going to lead to a lot of quality. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. It's a little bit erratic, the level of success of peer reviewed. There's not a lot of peer review about peer review. There's a whole movement about that, how the system of peer review is limited. Uh,
Hmm.
but in Chacruna, we could like make impact on communities very directly, and uh, you know started to be really enthusiastic about this. And then the activist part as well, trying to change policy, to engage in conversations, to be in direct dialogue with communities. So Chacruna is a kind of mix between academia, university, media, and community. We're not as hermetic, as inaccessible, as hard to reach, as expensive, as uh, exclusivist and elitist as some of academic work is. But it's also not just like any psychedelic society that is a group of people that are interested in psychedelics that put events, but actual people that have worked professionally as experts through academia or other fields like clinicians, trying to make this knowledge more accessible, have a good balance on content rigor, but also, papers that are with less jargon, less footnotes, less citations, less references, that are right to the point. That's a lot, the story of Chacruna. And it's using my training as an anthropologist to do a kind of anthropology outside of academia with more applied effects, with a right on impact on reality.
Yeah, I love that. And I think one thing that the psychedelic field definitely brings to light is that the sort of like modern Western medicine, academia ways of thinking is not the only valid way of thinking. And that, like you've talked about in other speaking engagements, is that the psychedelic field is very relational. And maybe for our listeners, if you could talk a little bit about the anthropological lens, since I know that's not everyone's background. So, what are some ways that human societies have had relationships with psychedelic plant medicine and other psychedelic related practices?
I mean, this is a really big question. I think, through time, different societies and cultures have had relationships to different substances, and it's widespread through history in all kinds of settings. I find it hard to make a summary right now. What I want to say is that in general, when we're talking about the subject, there has been a predominance of there has been a predominance of a biomedical narrative. So when the whole field around psychedelics is very created around this notion that these are drugs or substances or whatever name you want to give, psychedelics, or there's a whole discussion. We're going to call it biocultures, we're going to call it plant medicines, we're going to call it psychoactives. There are different definitions and ways to name which reflect certain disputes on how we understand the substances. But a lot of this knowledge has been created in hierarchical ways, where biomedicine or health studies are kind of placed on top. And like, this is the real effect of the drugs. Like, what are their chemical properties? What is their effect on the body? Does this cause addiction? Is this toxic? Is this lethal? Is this dangerous? Is this healing? Is this instead therapeutic? So it's like a whole emphasis on the property, on the drugs, on the chemical level. And this is related also to the way that the substances are classified, because they are classified by legal schedules that identify them by different properties. So it's both the law enforcement systems and biomedical reflections. The whole idea around the substances is focus a lot on the properties and what are the effects. And then, although everybody recognizes that it's not just the drug, it's also a lot of people use this conceptual framework that has been created by certain researchers called drug set and setting. So the drug would be the property, the set is the context of the individual and the age, the background, the expectations, and then the setting is the larger cultural and historical larger context. And I think social sciences has been like left to a second lenses
Mm.
and hasn't really played a very big role. It's also kind of hard to classify, like if you want to study this and you're going to have a wider look, let's say you could study certain practices, you could be like discussing them from the perspective of rituals and ceremonies, or you could be discussing by the perspective of secular parties and the use of different drugs, or you could be discussing them from the perspective of indigenous traditions. Like there's different ways to study these things, and social sciences has always been studying drugs or psychedelics not dissociated from those larger contexts. And that is mainly the work that I have been doing my whole career, speaking to medical doctors, counselors, psychologists, social workers, talking about the fact that the substances, they can't be dissociated by their contexts. Again, everybody recognizes that in principle, but when it comes to practical terms, there's a huge effort in trying to dissociate these drugs from the context and just wanting to talk about the drugs. And even this idea of clinical trials isolating the non-drug variables, like as if these things were kind of alien to the experience. And you have to understand what is at the core of the drugs. And our contribution has always to try to stretch the notions of this field and talk them in wider lenses.
Mm-hmm.
Something like
Yeah, definitely. You can tell that there's a lot of yeah, I guess tensions between like the Western medical standards and traditional knowledge. So, in terms of, you've talked about that a lot too. So, in terms of critiques on psychedelic science gatherings, for example, you've referred to the emergence of psychedelic conferences as like a new market. So, can you speak a bit about what exactly you mean by that and some of the other tensions and how to maybe work around or resolve those?
I think I wrote that paper back in the day. I think we were all kind of seeing this phenomena. It was also related to COVID. Like it's kind of fun to look backwards because I don't think that when I did that, I was so aware of this. I mean, it was in the heat of the moment. There was definitely like a hype, a few years back. Uh, People were expecting the approval of the FDA for MDMA for treatment of PTSD. And there was the explosion of a lot of startups and a lot of new businesses, both with longevity or wellness, or now it's AI. Back in the day, it was this new intersections. And then with COVID, everything went online. And there was it was a hype that, it was all these businesses emerging, but also a hype on the level of conferences, because a lot of people started to put conferences online and launch new conferences. So it was as if conferences became a product itself. Before, conferences were kind of a way that people would share new research findings, look for community, strengthen activism, and create a bond between people that didn't have a lot of space to share those common interests elsewhere. And then there was this kind of explosion of conferences as a kind of field in itself, and as a product to be sold. So there was just a lot of explosions of random people throwing in conferences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, I definitely agree. It's interesting to see the hype waves and how they sort of change. And same thing in the business world. A lot of businesses will like be developed and released, and then they'll sort of like trickle out. So it's all sort of following that same hype curve. And transitioning more to a discussion about epistemic injustices in particular in mainstream psychedelic research. Do you think there's a way that intentional intercultural dialogue could help counteract those issues?
I mean, most definitely. I think this is really important, and Chacruna has been a leader in this, but we're not the only ones. A lot of people are now talking about these topics as well. Uh, the field of psychedelic science has always prioritized certain kinds of knowledge, like, as I said, that are more focused on the drugs per se and on health issues, on working with certain professions. And at Chacruna, we have been trying to include plant medicines, ceremony, ritual, religion, the global south, indigenous voices, voices with an accent in the field of psychedelics. And we have been trying to help rewrite the stories that the field tell itself, because these stories are normally told by a certain perspective that privilege a certain gaze. It's like if you were narrating a scene and you have the perspective from that narrator. But if you were positioned elsewhere in that scene, you would see something different. So this field has largely told the story focusing on the global north, on biomedicine, on scientific research. And we have been trying to stretch the notions of even what it is, this field. So this field originally didn't include so much plant medicines or ceremony or anthropology or indigenous voices. And this, I think, has definitely changed, and it would be very unacceptable today to do a psychedelic science without any of this conference. But for example, when MAPS had the psychedelic science conference in 2010, it didn't include much of any of this. That was one thing that I was one of the activists, like, kind of the activist pushing that for MAPS to include ayahuasca, to include plant medicines, to include anthropology, to include indigenous leaders, etc. And as the field advances, we have a lot of potential. It's not about just including, it's about asking certain voices to help shape the questions, to help not just sit on the table, but to create the whole vision of how is this going to be led? How are we going to create this? How do we envision these conferences? How do we envision these conferences? So, for example, in 2018, Chacruna has launched this conference in Mexico, Sacred Plants in the Americas, that had 25 different indigenous leaders. The conference was free. The conference was in Spanish. The conference was by a lake that was a sacred point in the Wixárika cosmology, that is like one of their 5 cardinal points. So the whole proposal around the conference was to create it in a way that was much more welcoming and inclusive of other ways of knowledge, of other ways of being. We had a lot of activities outside. There were also ceremonies and cultural and artistic things happening around the conference. And particularly in the way we have been doing our conferences in dialogue with our indigenous partners, co-building in a much more horizontal and collaborative way. These ways of bringing together conferences, also engaging more in collaborations, in co-authorships, in consultations. So the whole field is evolving a lot. And there aren't many examples of what does this intercultural dialogue look like, because it's everything kind of new and kind of on the making and kind of still to be built. I always like to tell this story of my friend Dawn Davis. By the way, I just met her recently after many years in person. She was invited by me to come to Psychedelic Science 2017, and she's Shoshone Bendic and studies peyote. And she gave this beautiful lecture in psychedelic science, and a white woman, American ecologist, asked her, how can I, as an ecologist, like somebody who has my background and my kind of training, help you and your research about peyote? And then she was quiet, and Dawn was like thinking, and then she said, that's a really good question. Nobody ever asked that question to me. And I thought that was really interesting. I mean, the same thing in Brazil, like right now, there's a lot of dialogue with different Brazilian leaders as they are studying. First, they were studying ayahuasca and now Jurema, and you have a lot of like indigenous groups that have used Jurema traditionally having dialogue with medical doctors about the research they are conducting. So the research is being conducted already in dialogue with these groups. It's not about giving the research back and bringing the results, but it's about having these conversations while the research is doing. So there's a lot of different things that people can do. And it's all about like having diversity in teams. And there's a lot of research about this too, research that shows if you have more diverse teams, you have more diverse questions, you have more creative questions. If you put 10 white old American men, straight, cis, I have a lot of men friends like that. It's not, don't want to pick on that, just giving a kind of strong example for everybody to understand. And you ask them questions, I mean, the chances of coming to a certain types of answers is one. If you put on the room young and old, men and women, non-binary, different races, different ethnicities, different backgrounds, you have another kind of research, ideas and potential ways. So in having diversity, inclusion, and equity is actually a kind of more scientific attitude. It is a way to do a more rich science that includes different perspectives, that will pose more creative questions, and that will probably result in more alternative results. And I think at the moment right now, this is a big question for the field. How do we advance these dialogues, and what kind of research are we anticipating to come out of this?
Yeah, I love that you mentioned the scientific rigor part of that too, because there's a lot of irony there. It's why would you not want to include these diverse voices, not only to conduct more equitable and ethical research, but also it makes the like rigor of your findings even that much better. So there's no reason not to at that point. Yeah, I find that really interesting. And bringing this to a more global drug policy sort of lens, could you speak about how global drug policies impact traditional uses of plant medicines, and have there been, or what kinds of progress or setbacks have you observed in recent years? And that could relate to like in religious freedom or decriminalization, and Indigenous rights.
I mean, another very big question, but I think you also touched on something very central, which is, I mean, of course, prohibition has a huge impact on people across the globe. I think that the whole history of prohibition, the legacy of colonization, so basically Spaniards and Portuguese arriving to the Americas, or the New World, the Old World, and stigmatizing, persecuting, and demonizing indigenous practices. That is at the core of the prohibitionist system. This idea that these substances are either demoniac or criminal or hallucinogenic, so criminalized, pathologized, demonized, persecuted, made illegal, and there's a lot of overlap and a lot of discussion in drug policy, how the use of drugs has been a reason to persecute certain minorities, and how some ethnic minorities have been associated to the use of certain substances. So cannabis being associated to Mexicans, for example, or cocaine being associated to Black folks, or in Brazil, cannabis is associated to slaves, and alcohol to Irish, and opium to the Chinese. And even now you have a new version with the United States attacking Venezuela, and the rhetoric of the emergence of this new category, which would be narco terrorists. So you had like two kinds of forms of othering, of persecuting, stigmatizing, demonizing certain minorities, certain populations, certain others. So ones that are named terrorists, and the other that are named traffic dealers, and then you fusing these two categories together as a kind of narco terrorists that would justify the invasion of a sovereign country. And so the drug war has a lot of different ramifications. It continues to be alive, and it continues to still be used as a pretext, as an excuse to attack other lands and to monitor bodies and to control. It's the biopolitics, as Foucault would say, is this union, this alliance between biomedical frameworks and law enforcement, criminal justice, this fusion that makes the control of certain bodies and the control of certain populations. A lot of the rhetoric, we just had a really good community forum in Chacruna about the invasion of Venezuela, which I very much hope you can share with the people who are listening. But a lot of it allegedly to protect white women. There's a lot of discussions on how all these categories, gender, race, and class, interact in the forms of controls of bodies, and how drugs and the rhetoric around drugs have been playing a huge role on these forms of controls of certain bodies, certain sexualities, certain minorities, certain ethnicities, and so forth. But again, it happens with interviews. I got carried away on a certain direction. I forgot a bit what was the question.
That's okay. You answered it. And yeah, I want to bring in social sciences now because I know that's part of your background and a point of activism in psychedelic science. So, how can social sciences help with solving some of those issues and advancing psychedelic research in an ethically responsible manner? What's your opinion on that as well?
Yeah, I think I probably answered that a little bit before when you asked some other question, and I just started to talk about the role of social sciences advancing this research. Yeah, I think I addressed that a lot, just not to keep you hanging there. I just would add that I can't emphasize enough how important it is to have all voices in a room, and how much it's a combination between different forms of knowledge and different disciplines and different actors. So this is a big thing that I'm really proud in all Chacruna conferences, that I think it's kind of our brand. I feel we are really inclusive of different perspectives and different voices in ways that that other organizations are not necessarily involved. So I think trying to have dialogues that are interdisciplinary, but also include different, ethnicities, different backgrounds, different nationalities. A lot of things here in the United States. I mean, you are not here, you are in Canada. But in the United States, and I think as Canadians you can relate, there's often a very strong US-centric perspective, as if the United States is really the center of the globe and everything revolves around here. So I think bringing some diversity of disciplines, of ages, of perspectives is really important. And we have a lot of recommendations for organizations as well to have diverse teams, to do collaborations. For example, it's important for organizations to have young people on their boards, or as a kind of shadow board where you consult younger people to sort of have a perspective on how they they feel, because the world is changing a lot and it's getting really more and more complex, and it's hard to have a big picture if we don't try to include all of these voices.
Yeah, thank you for that answer. I love that, and I appreciate you emphasizing that more. And in terms of those diverse perspectives and some of the things that we could potentially learn, how do you think that accomplishing that could sort of reshape how we think about healing itself? So maybe I know that you probably know where I'm going with this, but Western ideologies is more of like an individual lens on learning. So how might that change if we incorporate more diverse perspectives?
again, to be seen. It is something we're building together. It's something that, we haven't a lot of historical examples. I think there's a few examples of interdisciplinary groups or research that, I see there's a lot of really interesting things happening in Australia with Native Americans over there. And there's new research happening in Canada itself. My friend Erica Dick is studying the Native American Church in Canada, creating projects that are more collaborative. We're doing a new book right now in Brazil. This year, 2025, well, last year, I celebrated the 25th anniversary of my first book, The Ritual Use of Ayahuasca. And that was a book that took me many years to edit. And now last year, celebrating 25 years of that first book, that book tried to make a very big overview of the use of ayahuasca in Brazil. But 26 years later now, it's a whole different scenario. You have a lot of indigenous groups going out of the Amazon and serving ayahuasca in big cities of Sao Paulo or big cities like Los Angeles, New York, San Francisco, all over the world. And so we're trying to create a book that is more up to date. And while we're doing this book, we're also trying to create methods that are more contemporary. What is an anthropology that tries to be truly collaborative and truly inclusive and truly horizontal? So how can we do books that incorporate this spirit? We're trying to create a lot of interviews, which is important because not always you're going to have indigenous leaders writing papers. There are some that do, and there are some anthropologists that are indigenous, and there are some intellectual indigenous leaders, but there are also other ones that are more focused on oral traditions. So maybe we can try to create interviews, or we can do transcripts of lectures. Ailton Krenak, for example, he's a big indigenous intellectual. A lot of his work has been transcribed lectures that he gives, edited by his allies and himself, made into books. Or maybe we can have co-authorships, or maybe we can try to have other visual expressions like art, poems, or, drawings. How can we create other ways to share this knowledge? It is also a big question. There's, there's some of this work, there's some people working to collect like different indigenous storytelling or myths or narratives. There's a person in Brazil working, for example, he's a friend of mine, and he's going to be in our conference, Psychedelic Culture. He has created a Huni Queen. It's a Pano group. They were also known as Kashinawa video game. So it's like telling the stories of origin, the myths of origin, and different narratives of the Huni Queen people in the form of a video game. It's co-created by the indigenous Huni Queen youth and his team. And there's a lot of anthropologists that are doing very interesting projects, like going to different territory and teaching people on how to film their traditions. So indigenous people in partnerships with non-indigenous learning how to master different technologies to try to record their own songs, record their dances, record their myths of origin, and have a way to spread this knowledge. There's a whole discussion on the world of museums. How do we create museums that are not this extractivist form to which museums were born, that like stealing materials from indigenous people and putting them for exhibition? This whole gaze that starts with like having indigenous people being captured and brought to Europe to be put in museums, in zoos, in cages, in exhibits, as kind of things to be observed. There's a strong colonial legacy of museums still that portray like indigenous people among the flora and the fauna, like this kind of natural world, as if they were not as human as we were. I mean, not to talk about what happened in social media recently with the president posting a racist video that places Black people as kind of non-human, as as monkeys. And so we still have so many legacies of colonization in all levels, and different institutions are trying to grapple with this. We have, I'm also friends of people that are leading in Sao Paulo an indigenous museum, indigenous led. It was co-created by the Guarani people in the state of Sao Paulo. So they co-create this museum together with their non-indigenous allies. And it's really super sweet. It's not very conventional. You go there and like there is you go and there's a part that you have to crawl in and you have to lay down and you look at the sky that they created. They invented this. It's not something that you see in any other museum. It's like they did that little corner that this is happening. It's not as aesthetic. And then the museum is like this living organic. I got carried away. I'm gonna stop. Sorry about that.
No, no worries. I really appreciate that.
To bark.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's super fascinating, especially the view on museums. And you sort of answered my last question, which is like things that you're excited about in the field of psychedelic science and related areas now. So I think I'll just finish off by asking if there's anything else that you would like to share about the Chacruna Institute or other projects you have going on. So I'll leave it open to you for the last little bit of the conversation.
Yeah, thanks again for the interest in our work. I mean, there's a lot of things of our work in Chacruna that I feel excited about. I am kind of stepping into my oldest phase, which is my first white hairs and going towards my senior age. I am 54 and time really flies. I am very interested in intergenerational talks. I'm completely fascinated with the new generations, a little bit ambiguous, love and hate. I think what is really fascinating to me is how many young people identify as non-binary or queer friendly and, or like are bisexual. It's just, I think there's a lot of more openness in that realm than it existed when I was growing up. I feel a little bit more challenged with how everybody seems to think that they are an expert on everything. I think, we're criticizing academia and this kind of more old-fashioned knowledge and scientific kind of hard form of understanding things, but we all went through that. So, it's kind of different to criticize it after you've done that versus not ever, writing a PhD and like not, being an expert. I'm just very curious on how young people often think, her work addresses this and that. And it's just like the interest that that person has. She hasn't actually published anything or done field work on anything. I'm bothered by how a lot of people in the field seem to think that they are experts on everything. And I'm very interested on this intergenerational dialogue. And so we have an internship program in Chacruna that I find extremely interesting. We are bringing a lot of new voices and, creating a lot of new leaders, careers, incubating and launching new leaders, new careers. I think trying to mentor younger people and trying to be in dialogue with younger generations and trying to launch new careers and new ideas is something that I'm very proud and very interested in. I also am excited about our new book that I just mentioned, and we're also doing another book on critical perspectives in psychedelic therapies, which I very much feel it's missing, that exactly brings all these other angles to the discussion on psychedelic assisted therapies. And the conference that we're doing, we're doing a big conference, Psychedelic Culture. I would like to invite everybody to come. It's in the Bay Area from April 17 to 19. It has 3 days with 3 simultaneous tracks, a 4th day with 2 workshops. It has a fundraising dinner, it has a speaker and sponsor dinner, and it has an after party. It's the most ambitious project I've ever participated here in the United States. It's a lot of work. We had a call for abstract that we had almost like 200 applications, and we had to eliminate about 140 people. And so it's a big challenge ahead of us. We also have a membership program. We have a really nice community. and continue to advance our branches in Chacruna, Latin America, Mexico, and Brazil. Our Instagram account was hijacked and boycotted by Meta. We hired a lawyer.
Oh no.
We made a response and we lost. So we're pretty devastated. We had, it had almost more than, I think, 10 years, because it was since my first years in Mexico. Chacruna was actually born in Mexico. And it's a big loss for us. We lost our Instagram and our Chacruna Latin America Instagram. So we're trying to recover it. And, it's been a big ask, and try to get a hold of this back again. So anyway, we have a lot going on. I want to invite people to follow. We have 4 websites: Chacruna Latin America, the Indigenous Reciprocity, and Psychedelic Culture. And of course, our more dear program is the Indigenous Reciprocity, that we continue to support Indigenous people on their own terms, not asking them, anything in return, and the kind of decolonial philanthropy where we're trying to support people's projects. We're not creating anything of our own on the ground, and we're not, telling people what to do or hiring them or paying them to do things that we say they should do. We're really trying to support their own projects, their own priorities. We give small grants, seed money, small grants to 12 different Indigenous organizations in different countries. And, have a very organic and modest and cool relationship that they spontaneously share with us their progress, what they're doing, and, their main milestones, and we give visibility to it in our social media. It's not something that is conditioned, that has strings attached. It's money being given to their operations that are doing important work, that were self-determined, and we very much need support. And our doors are open. We have volunteer positions, internship positions, and yeah, it's nice to be in dialogue with folks in the North. And I hope you can come to our conference.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, we'll be sure to link the Chacruna Institute in our description so people can find it and all the resources there. And thank you so much. I really look forward to following your work. And this was a lovely conversation. So again, I'd just like to extend my gratitude to you for being here.
Thank you all. Have a great day.
You as well. Thanks so much for joining me for this conversation with Dr. Bia Labate. I'd like to thank the Center for Psychedelics Health and Research at Queen's University and the support of our sponsors at the Ontario Brain Institute, the Canadian Biomarker Integration Network in Depression, and Providence Care Hospital. Until next time, be well and integrate wisely.